I don't need you anymore. My wife said it with a smile. Not in our kitchen, not behind a closed office door. She said it at the head of a 12-foot mahogany boardroom table under recessed lights that made the glass water pitcher sparkle in front of 9 board members, 2 senior executives, and the general counsel. I don't need you anymore. Not at home, not here. Then she slid the envelope across the table. Divorce papers. For a moment, no one breathed. The air felt heavy like the second before a summer storm breaks. My name, Ethan Marshall, was printed neatly in black ink on the top page. Camille Whitmore Marshall had filed for divorce the same week she became CEO of Merrow and Finch Holdings, and she had chosen that moment, her first official board meeting, to make sure everyone understood she was in charge. I looked down at the envelope, then back at her, and I smiled. The applause had barely faded when she did it. 10 minutes earlier, the board had voted unanimously. Graham Whitmore, her father and outgoing CEO, had stood at the head of the table and said, "I am proud to introduce the next leader of Merrow and Finch." Camille stood, navy-tailored suit, pearl earrings, the kind of composure that looked effortless because she had practiced it for years in front of mirrors in industry audiences. She thanked the board, thanked her father, thanked the incredible team that brought us here. She did not thank me. I didn't expect her to. For the last 15 years, I had been the quiet architecture behind the numbers she presented. Chief Operating Officer, contract strategist, the man who secured the multi-year logistics agreements that accounted for over 60% of our annual revenue. She was the face. I was the engine. When the formalities ended and the general counsel began outlining next quarter projections, Camille raised her hand lightly. "Before we move on," she said, voice smooth and controlled, "there's a personal matter I'd like to clarify." Several heads turned. She looked at me, not with anger, but with something colder resolution. "I've decided to make some changes in my life to reflect the direction of this company. Effective immediately, Ethan and I will be separating. Divorce papers have been filed." A sharp intake of breath from someone near the end of the table. Then she added almost casually, "And given the potential conflict of interest, I believe it's best that Ethan transitions out of his operational role. We'll discuss restructuring after this meeting." The implication hung in the air. She wasn't just divorcing her husband. She was eliminating a power center. I watched the board members' faces, some stunned, some uncomfortable, 1 or 2 calculating. Camille slid the envelope toward me. "I don't need you anymore," she said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not at home, not here." For a heartbeat, my chest tightened. Not from heartbreak, from recognition. She had been planning this. The public nature of it wasn't an accident. It was a signal to the board, to her father, to anyone who might question her authority. I felt the old instinct, the one that wanted to defend, to explain, to remind the room of the contracts I'd negotiated, the client relationships I'd cultivated, the growth percentages tied directly to my strategies. Instead, I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Understood," I said. My voice surprised even me with its steadiness. "Congratulations, Camille." There was something almost electric about that moment. She had expected resistance or pleading or anger. Instead, she got calm. I gathered the envelope, slipped it into my leather portfolio, and stood. "Is there anything else?" I asked. Her jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second. "No, Ethan, that will be all." I nodded to the board. "Then I won't hold you up." As I walked out of that room, I could feel their eyes on my back. The door closed behind me with a soft click. barely audible over the hum of the building's HVAC system. 15 years. That's how long I had spent inside those walls. I didn't go to my office immediately. Instead, I stopped by the large window overlooking downtown Nashville. Late afternoon sun reflected off the Cumberland River in streaks of gold. The city looked the same, but something fundamental had shifted. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from Renee Park, my executive assistant. "What just happened in there?" I typed back, "We'll talk in my office." When I finally stepped inside, the space felt different. Same corner view, same framed awards on the wall, same faint scent of leather and coffee. But I knew the way you know when a house has been sold, that it wasn't mine anymore. Renee stood when I entered. Her dark eyes scanned my face. "She did it, didn't she?" "She filed," I said, setting my portfolio on the desk. "And she wants me out of operations." Renee's mouth fell open. "She can't just—" "She can," I interrupted gently. "She's CEO now." There was a long silence. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. I considered the question. Was I okay? My wife had just ended our marriage in front of a boardroom and moved to strip me of the role I'd built from scratch. And yet a strange calm had settled over me. "Yes," I said. "Finally, I am." I walked to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, the one with the small silver lock. Inside a dark brown leather folder, it was thick, organized, labeled in clean block letters. Contingency updated. I ran my fingers over the cover. 5 years ago, when whispers of succession planning had first started, I had made a decision. Not out of spite, not out of paranoia, out of prudence. I had created Marshall Advisory LLC. On paper, it was a consulting arm designed to streamline contract negotiations and improve tax efficiency. The board had approved it without much discussion. Why wouldn't they? Profits had increased 12% the first year alone. Over time, new service agreements had been routed through Marshall Advisory, not hidden, not concealed, just so you structured, carefully, legally, strategically. Renee watched as I opened the folder and flipped through the tab sections. Master service agreements, client addendums, assignment clauses. "You knew this might happen," she whispered. "I knew power changes people," I replied, "and I knew I never wanted to be disposable." My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't internal. It was Monica Hale, CEO of Hale Retail Group, our largest client. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. "Monica," I said evenly. "Ethan," she replied, confusion clear in her voice. "I just got an email from Camille. She says she's my new point of contact. What's going on?" I looked out the window again, the city still glowing in late afternoon light. The next morning I thought, it will be very interesting. "Ethan," Monica repeated, her voice tightening, "why is Camille telling me you're stepping away?" I leaned against the edge of my desk and watched the skyline shimmer beyond the glass. "There have been some internal changes," I said carefully, "but our agreement remains exactly as signed." It paused. "With you," she clarified. "Yes," I replied. "With me?" Monica exhaled slowly. "Then that's who we're staying with." When the call ended, I didn't feel triumph. I felt confirmation. Renee was still standing across from my desk, arms folded now, studying me like she was seeing someone new. "She doesn't know, does she?" Renee asked. "Know what?" "That most of our top-tier agreements route through Marshall Advisory." I closed the leather folder and slid it back into the drawer. "No," I said quietly. "She never paid attention to the headers." Ectum. If you had asked anyone in that boardroom to describe our marriage, They would have said it was strategic. Camille and I had met at an industry summit 15 years ago. She was already being groomed to inherit Morrow and Finch. Whitmore money, Whitmore legacy, Whitmore expectations. I was a mid-level operations director at a regional logistics firm presenting on supply chain resilience. We argued during a Q&A session. She challenged my projections. I corrected her assumptions. Later that night, she told me she liked that I wasn't intimidated by her. I told her I liked that she didn't pretend to understand what she didn't. Back then, it felt like balance. Over time, it became contrast. Camille was built for rooms, cocktail events, investor dinners, charity galas, where influence was traded in smiles and handshakes. She remembered names, made people feel seen, knew exactly how to hold eye contact just long enough. I was built for numbers, for contracts, for long conference calls where margins were dissected line by line until both sides felt satisfied. She shined in spotlight. I thrived in structure. When I joined Morrow and Finch's COO, it was because I had been asked, not by Camille, but by her father. Graham Whitmore had pulled me aside after a quarterly presentation and said, "We need someone who understands the machinery beneath the shine." I understood what that meant. Camille would be the shine. I would be the machinery. For years, it worked. I negotiated the Hale Retail Group contract when they were hemorrhaging distribution costs. I redesigned our fulfillment strategy to cut inefficiencies in 3 regional hubs. I structured the Calder medical supply deal with tiered performance incentives that secured us 5 years of guaranteed revenue. Camille presented those results at board meetings, and to her credit, she presented them well. But over time, I noticed something. Whenever a client referred to Ethan's team or Ethan's strategy, Camille's smile would tighten just slightly. Whenever her father praised operational growth, he would add, "Camille has surrounded herself with strong support. Support, not partner." The first time I heard whispers about succession, it wasn't from Camille. It was from a board member who assumed I already knew. "Of course, you'll take the CEO role," he said casually over drinks. "You'll keep running operations." I nodded, and that night, for the first time, I opened a blank document titled Marshall Advisory Structural Proposal. Not because I distrusted Camille, because I understood legacy. Legacy favors blood. 5 years ago, when I proposed routing new strategic contracts through a consulting LLC for efficiency and flexibility, Graham had barely skimmed the paperwork. "Will it improve margins?" he asked. "Yes." "Will it complicate reporting?" "No." "Then do it." The board approved the structure. Legal reviewed it. Everyone signed. Camille called it Ethan's pet optimization project. She didn't attend the follow-up meetings. She didn't read the addendums. And she never noticed that over time, the language shifted. Marshall Advisory LLC would serve as primary strategic partner. Morrow and Finch would act as fulfillment provider. The distinction seemed subtle. It wasn't. By the time she became CEO, 14 of our top-tier accounts were structured that way. Not hidden, not disguised, just overlooked. Westerum. Renee sat down across from me as another notification buzzed on my phone. Vince called her. I answered on the first ring. "Vince, I just got blindsided," he said bluntly. "Camille's email says she's consolidating communication channels. What's happening?" "She's stepping into her new role," I replied. "And you?" "I'm reassessing mine." There was a beat of silence. "You're the reason we signed," Vince said finally. "Your team understands regulatory compliance at a level most firms don't." "I appreciate that. If you're out, We need to review our position. I didn't promise anything. I didn't threaten. I simply said, let me confirm some things, Vince. I'll call you tomorrow morning. After that call ended, the office felt quieter. Outside my door, I could hear faint movement staff, unaware that tectonic plates were shifting beneath their feet. She thinks this is about authority, Renee said softly. It is, I replied, but not in the way she understands. My phone lit up again. Camille. I watched her name flash across the screen. CEO, wife, soon to be ex. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered, hello, Camille. Her voice was controlled, but underneath it I could hear strain. Why are our largest clients calling me confused? I leaned back in my chair. Have you reviewed the contract headers? What are you talking about? The service agreements, I said calmly. Who they're signed with. There was a pause long enough for me to imagine her standing in her newly renovated CEO office, hand pressed against the glass desk, eyes scanning digital documents for the first time. You moved them, she said. They were structured with board approval, I corrected, 5 years ago. You can't just... I didn't just, I said quietly. I prepared. The silence that followed felt heavier than the one in the boardroom. You think this makes you powerful? She asked. No, I replied. It makes me not disposable. Outside my window, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the city. She wanted to demonstrate control, but control and leverage are not the same thing. And tomorrow morning she was going to learn the difference. I arrived at the office before sunrise the next morning, not out of nostalgia, out of strategy. The building was quiet at 6:15 a.m., the lobby lights dimmed to their overnight setting. My key card still worked, for now. I took the elevator to the executive floor alone, listening to the low mechanical hum as if it were counting down to something irreversible. When the doors opened, the hallway lights flickered on in sequence. The scent of fresh carpet cleaner lingered faintly. Facilities must have shampooed overnight in celebration of the new CEO. Camille liked everything polished. I walked into my office and closed the door behind me. The space felt smaller in the early morning light. My diplomas on the wall, framed photos from client site visits, the award plaque from the Nashville Business Journal recognizing Operational Innovation of the Year. I began packing, not hurriedly, not angrily, methodically, each object into a banker's box. 15 years reduced to paper and glass. At 6:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Monica Hale. Good morning, I answered. Ethan, she said without preamble. My legal team pulled the agreement. The master services contract is with Marshall Advisory, LLC. Camille's email refers to Morrow and Finch as our primary provider. That's inaccurate. I sat down slowly in my desk chair. Our structure hasn't changed, I said evenly. Marshall Advisory holds the strategic contract. Morrow and Finch executes fulfillment. And if you're no longer there, then Marshall Advisory will continue to fulfill the agreement under its terms. There was a pause through whom Monica asked. I'm finalizing alternative partnerships, I replied. Your operations won't be disrupted. She didn't hesitate. Good, because we signed with you, not a surname. After we hung up, I stared at the phone in my hand for a long moment. Surname. That word had carried weight in that boardroom for decades. Whitmore, legacy, inheritance. But contracts don't care about surnames. They care about signatures. At 7:03 a.m., Vince Calder called. I need clarity, he said bluntly. Our board is asking whether your departure invalidates any strategic clauses. It doesn't, I said. Your agreement is with Marshall Advisory. There's an assignment clause allowing subcontracted fulfillment. That's how it's been structured from the beginning. So, we're not obligated to stay with Morrow Finch. You're obligated to the terms we signed, I replied carefully. Not to a corporate title, he exhaled audibly. Then keep me informed. We'll follow the structure. By the time I finished boxing my books, 3 additional emails had arrived from senior procurement officers and other client companies, each politely requesting clarification. It wasn't chaos, not yet. It was confusion. And confusion is what precedes panic. At 8:28 a.m., as employees began filtering into the executive wing, my phone lit up again. Camille. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. Where are you? She demanded. In my office. Stay there. The line went dead. I leaned back in my chair and waited. Exactly 4 minutes later, my door opened without a knock. Camille stood in the doorway, perfectly composed in charcoal gray hair, swept into a low bun. Only her eyes betrayed her. You moved them, she said quietly, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. I structured them, I corrected. You routed 14 of our largest accounts through your LLC with board approval. You never told me. I presented the proposal 5 years ago. You said it sounded boring. Her jaw tightened. You did this because you didn't trust me. I did this because I understood risk. She took a step closer to my desk. Risk? She echoed. I am your wife. For now, I said gently. The words landed between us like glass. She placed both hands flat on my desk. You've put this company in jeopardy. No, I replied calmly. You did when you assumed title equaled control. Her nostrils flared slightly. This is sabotage. No, I said again. This is business structure. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The city outside my window was fully awake now. Traffic flowing, sunlight bright and unforgiving. You will attend an emergency board meeting at 10 o'clock, she said finally. They want answers. I won't, I replied. Her eyes widened. You're still under contract. I was asked to transition out of operations yesterday, I reminded her in front of witnesses. That was before I understood the scope of what you'd done. The scope hasn't changed, I said evenly. Only your awareness has. She straightened, folding her arms across her chest. You think this gives you leverage? I know it does. Silence again, then quieter. You're willing to burn this place down. I looked around my office. It's the place where I'd spend half my adult life. I built most of it, I said softly. Why would I burn it? Because you're angry. I considered that. Was I angry? Yes, but anger wasn't steering this. Preparation was. You divorced me in a boardroom, I said. Did you expect me to leave quietly? I expected you to accept reality. I did, I replied. That's why I prepared for it. Her expression shifted just slightly from anger to something closer to realization. You've been planning to leave. No, I said. I've been planning not to be trapped. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at it, then back up at me. 2 more clients have called, she said tightly. They're asking for you. I nodded once. Because their contracts don't say your name. The words hung heavy in the air. For the first time since she'd stood at the head of that table, Camille looked uncertain. You're coming to the meeting, she said, but it sounded less like a command now. I'll have my attorney attend, I replied. Her eyes hardened again. You're making a mistake. I stood up slowly, closing the lid on the final box. No, I said, you did. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked out of my office without another word. Through the glass wall, I could see executives beginning to gather down the hall, whispers already circulating. I picked up my box and took one last look at the room. 15 years. I carried the box to the elevator. At 9:12 a.m., as the door slid shut, my phone buzzed with a text from Renee. "Half the operations team is asking if you're hiring." I smiled to myself. The contracts didn't say her name, and soon, neither would the team. By 9:45 a.m., I was no longer in the Marrow and Finch building. I was sitting at my dining room table, laptop open, legal pad beside me, coffee growing cold as notifications stacked up faster than I could read them. Renee had resigned at 9:20. Jordan Ellis, senior operations manager, had texted at 9:27. "If you're building something, I'm in." At 9:31, my attorney Dana Klein called. "They've scheduled an emergency board meeting," she said without greeting. 10 a.m. sharp. "They want to discuss client volatility." "Volatility?" I repeated dryly. "They're using careful language. Are you going?" "Yes, as your representative." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. "Good," I said. "Bring the contract summaries." "You think they haven't read them yet?" Dana asked. "I think some of them signed things they didn't understand." Dana made a quiet sound of agreement. "I'll call you after." When the line disconnected, I turned back to my screen. 14 top-tier accounts. I opened a spreadsheet I hadn't needed in years because I knew the numbers by heart. Marshall Advisory, LLC, held strategic agreements representing 62% of Morrow & Finch's annual recurring revenue. Not projections, actual signed contracts. I didn't hide it, I just structured it. At 10:03 a.m., my phone vibrated. Donna. I put her on speaker. "Well?" I asked. "You would have enjoyed this," she replied. "Tell me." There was a faint rustle of paper on her end. "Camille opened by accusing you of breach of fiduciary duty. Claimed you diverted core revenue away from the company." I closed my eyes briefly, and two board members interrupted her. "Which two, Franklin and Ortega?" That surprised me. Franklin was old-school finance. Ortega rarely spoke at all. "What did they say?" I asked. "They said they remembered approving the LLC structure 5 years ago. They requested the original board minutes. I provided them." I could almost picture it. Camille at the head of the table posture, rigid, watching as pages were passed around. They read the addendum language aloud. Dana continued. "Primary strategic contractor, Marshall Advisory, LLC, fulfillment partner, Morrow & Finch Holdings." I exhaled slowly and then I asked. Then the room went quiet. The numbers had gone silent. Because numbers don't argue, they just exist. They asked Camille whether she'd reviewed the contractual architecture before announcing your transition, Dana said. And she said she'd relied on existing executive summaries. I let out a humorless breath. Executive summaries, the polished versions, the shine. "They're concerned," Dana went on, "not about legality, about leverage." That's accurate. One of them asked, and I'm quoting here, "If Marshall Advisory chooses to disengage, what's our contingency?" I stood up and walked toward the window. Downtown Nashville looked calm, oblivious. "What did you say?" I asked. "That Marshall Advisory has no obligation to disengage, but it also has no obligation to continue under identical terms." There was a pause, and then Dana set her tone, shifting slightly. "They authorized a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" "To retain Marshall Advisory as a formal long-term strategic partner. Multi-year contract, guaranteed minimums." I laughed softly. They fired me and now they want to hire my company. Yes. What did Camille say? Dana hesitated. She objected. I'm sure she did. She argued that this undermines her authority as CEO. Enos, the board's position is that authority without revenue is symbolic. I felt that sentence settle in my chest. Authority without revenue is symbolic. Is there talk of litigation? I asked. Frankly, no. Your structure is clean. They'd lose. Good. There was another pause. Ethan Dana said carefully, this is no longer about divorce. I know. It's about control. I know that too. We ended the call and I stood there for a long time, staring at the skyline. At 10:48 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Jordan. He didn't bother with formalities. Half the ops floor is whispering. He said Camille's in her office with the CFO HR. Clarity. He lowered his voice. Their clarity. He lowered his voice. They're scared, Ethan. They should be, I replied evenly. Change is uncomfortable. By noon, 5 employees had texted privately asking if I was starting something new. I hadn't decided yet. Or maybe I had, and I just hadn't admitted it to myself. Marshall Advisory had always been a shield. Now it was looking more like a launch pad. At 12:17 p.m., a new email arrived from Camille Whitmore Marshall. Subject: we need to talk. No emojis, no pleasantries, just a time and a location. Coffee shop on West End, 4:30 p.m. Alone, I stared at the message. 5 years ago, she told me I was too cautious, too calculating. Now, she was learning what calculation looks like when it's patient. At 10:20 p.m., Dana texted again. They're drafting the offer, 7 figures annually, 3-year minimum, performance bonuses. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened a blank document on my laptop. Marshall Advisory, LLC, expansion model. For the first time, I allowed myself to think not about defense, but about growth. If half the operations team followed, if 2 regional fulfillment centers partnered, if our largest clients reaffirmed, this wasn't revenge, it was infrastructure. My phone buzzed again, this time from Graham Whitmore. We need to talk, man. I stared at the message for several seconds. For 15 years, he had treated me as useful, never indispensable. And now, perhaps for the first time, he understood the difference. I set the phone down without replying. At 4:25 p.m., I walked into the coffee shop. Camille was already seated by the window. She looked composed, but not triumphant. And for the first time since she slid those papers across the table, I saw something else in her expression. Uncertainty. The day the numbers went silent had changed the room. Tomorrow, it would change everything else. Camille didn't stand when I approached the table. She didn't smile either. The coffee shop was quiet for late afternoon. Low jazz playing through ceiling speakers. Sunlight filtering through tall windows and casting long, amber streaks across the wooden floor. A few students hunched over laptops. A couple in the corner arguing softly about something that probably felt monumental to them. Compared to the last 24 hours of my life, it all felt distant. You look tired, she said as I took the seat across from her. So do you, I replied. Her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, then steadied. They blindsided me, she said. No greeting, no preamble. Franklin and Ortega, they acted like this structure was obvious. It was documented, I said evenly. You could have told me. I did, I replied, 5 years ago. She exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around her coffee cup. That was operational detail, she said. You know how many things cross my desk in a week? I do, I said. Because I filtered most of them before they reached you. That landed. Silence stretched between us, thick but not hostile. I didn't divorce you to humiliate you, she said finally. You did it in front of the board, I replied calmly. Her jaw tightened. I needed to establish independence from me, from anyone who might think I inherited authority. I studied her face. You thought cutting me out would prove you earned it? Yes. The honesty surprised me. And did it? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. No, she admitted at last. Outside the window, a delivery truck rolled past slowly, blocking the light for a moment before moving on. You've put the company in a precarious position, she said. No, I corrected gently. I put myself in a secure one. And the rest of us, I leaned back in my chair. You assumed I'd fold, I said, that I'd walk away quietly, that the contracts, the relationships, the infrastructure would simply revert to you. That's how executive transitions work, she said sharply. For employees, I replied, not for architects. Her expression hardened again. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. I'm exhausted, I said honestly, but I'm not sorry. A barista called out a name at the counter. Someone laughed near the door. Life moving forward indifferent. What do you want? She asked finally. Stability, I said, for the clients, for the team, for myself. You already have leverage. I have options. And which one are you choosing? I didn't answer right away because the truth was I hadn't fully chosen yet. That morning after Dana's call, I'd spent hours drafting contingency plans. Not emotional ones, structural ones. Jordan had texted again around noon. I'm not waiting to be laid off. If you're building, I'm ready. By 2 o'clock, 3 more team members had reached out privately. Operations analysts, procurement coordinators, people who understood the system because they'd helped build it. By 3, I had 2 regional fulfillment centers on the phone, Chattanooga and Louisville. Neither exclusive to Morrow and Finch, both willing to discuss partnership. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't comfortable. It was building the plane while flying it. I'm not going back as your subordinate, I said finally. I'm not offering that. You might, I replied quietly. If the board pressures you, she looked away briefly. They've already drafted an offer to Marshall Advisory, she admitted. I know. Her eyes snapped back to mine. How? Because they understand risk. They're undermining me. They're protecting revenue. Her shoulders dropped slightly. For years, she said, voice softer now, I felt like I was standing in your shadow. That surprised me more than anything else. She'd said, you were CEO and waiting. I said, you were never in my shadow. I was the face, she said bitterly. You were the substance. I considered that. I never asked for the spotlight. I said I asked for respect. And you think this is respect? She asked. No, I said, this is consequence. The word hung there. Not punishment, not revenge. Consequence. What happens now? She asked quietly. That depends, I said. On what? On whether you want partnership or control. Her expression flickered again, calculating, weighing. I won't be seen as weak, she said. You won't be seen as reckless either, I replied. She stared at me for a long moment. If I recommend a formal partnership, she said slowly, with Marshall Advisory as primary strategic contractor, then you demonstrate leadership, I finished, not insecurity. And our marriage? I held her gaze. That's separate. Is it? She asked. Yes. For the first time since this began, something like vulnerability crossed her face. You'd really walk away? You already did? I said gently. The truth settled between us like dust after a collapse. At 5:12 p.m., my phone buzzed again. "Jordan, you're not going to believe this. HR just asked if I'd commit to a retention bonus. They're scared." I typed back, "Don't sign anything." Camille noticed the movement of my hands. "They're calling you, aren't they?" "Yes." "How many?" "Enough." She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. "You planned this," she said. "I prepared for instability," I corrected. She let out a long breath. "If the board forces a partnership," she said, "you win." I shook my head slowly. "This isn't about winning. It feels like it. It's about not being erased." Silence again. Then she stood. "I'll recommend the partnership," she said. 3 years competitive terms. That's a start. And after that? After that, I said, standing as well, we see whether collaboration is stronger than ego. She hesitated, then extended her hand. "For business." I looked at it for a moment before shaking. "For business." When she walked out of the coffee shop, she looked smaller somehow, not diminished human. I sat back down and opened my laptop. Marshall Advisory LLC, Phase 1 expansion. If this was going to happen, it wouldn't be halfway. By 7 that evening, I had Atronome secured provisional agreements with 2 fulfillment centers, drafted employment offers for 8 team members, confirmed preliminary commitments from 6 major clients. The adrenaline carried me through the fatigue, building the plane while flying it, and for the first time in years, the horizon didn't belong to someone else's surname. It belonged to me. By the 3rd week, I stopped sleeping through the night. Not because I regretted anything, because building something real is louder than anger. Marshall Advisory was no longer a legal shield on paper. It was a living organism. 8 people working 14-hour days inside a temporary office space we'd secured near the gulch. Exposed brick walls, folding tables, whiteboards crowded with timelines and vendor flowcharts. It smelled like coffee and ambition. Jordan ran operations like a man who had finally been allowed to move without someone looking over his shoulder. Renee handled client coordination with surgical calm. 3 analysts from my old team had followed within the first week. We weren't improvising anymore. We were structuring. The first time a truck rerouted through our Chattanooga partner without delay, I felt something shift inside me. Not revenge, momentum. On day 21, Dana called. "They accepted your counter." I leaned back in my chair slowly. "Clarify," I said. 3-year strategic partnership between Morrow and Finch and Marshall Advisory. Guaranteed minimum revenue performance escalators, autonomy clauses, and the equity 5% advisory stake, non-voting but profit participating. I exhaled. 5% wasn't control, but it was voice. "And Camille?" I asked. "She fought it," Dana said plainly. "The board gave her an ultimatum: sign the partnership or step down." I stared at the city through the large warehouse window. What did she choose? Minimum. She signed. There was no triumph in that moment, just gravity. The following Monday, the official announcement went out company-wide. Marrow and Finch Holdings is pleased to announce a strategic partnership with Marshall Advisory, LLC, to enhance operational excellence and long-term growth. My phone didn't stop vibrating for hours. Former colleagues, clients, competitors pretending to congratulate. At 4:17 p.m., Graham Whitmore requested lunch. I accepted. He chose the same steakhouse he'd favored for decades. Dark wood, low lighting, white tablecloths that absorbed sound like secrets. He looked older, not frail, just worn. "You've done something remarkable," he said after the waiter poured water and left us alone. "I structured something sustainable," I replied. He nodded once. "I underestimated you." "That's not new," I said calmly. He didn't flinch. "I thought Camille needed the spotlight to grow," he continued. "I thought you needed stability. I needed respect." He held my gaze longer than usual. "I should have made you CEO." The words landed with more weight than I expected. "I didn't need the title," I said, "but you deserved it." "Maybe, but deserving and receiving are rarely twins." "You're asking me to come back," I said. Not a question. "Yes, as Watanur CEO." I stared at him. "And Camille AIM Serena M. She would transition to Chief Marketing Officer." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the irony. She'd never accept that. "She already has," he replied quietly. That surprised me. "Conditionally," he added. "Of course. She wants the two of you to attempt reconciliation." There it was, business and marriage braided together again. "No," I said. He didn't seem shocked. "I won't return as a symbol of restored family unity," I continued. "Marshall Advisory is stable. We're profitable. We have contracts independent of Marrow and Finch. You'd walk away from the legacy." "I already did," I said gently. We finished lunch without drama. When I stepped back into the Nashville air, it felt sharper, clearer, was certain. That evening, Camille came to the temporary office, unannounced. Jordan raised an eyebrow when he saw her through the glass door, but didn't interfere. She looked different, less polished, more direct. "I won't beg," she said as soon as the door closed behind her. "I didn't expect you to. They offered you my position. I declined." She blinked. "You declined?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I don't want to build inside a structure that only respects me when I threaten it." Silence filled the small office. "You always believed you were the stronger one," she said quietly. "I believed I was prepared." "And you were." The admission wasn't bitter. It was honest. She stepped closer to the desk. "I made a mistake." "Yes," I said calmly. "I confused authority with independence." "Yes, I thought divorcing you publicly would prove I wasn't propped up." "It proved something," I replied, "just not what you intended." Her shoulders lowered. "I don't want to be your enemy," she said. "You're not," I answered, "but we're not partners either." "Not in marriage," I said. The words hurt, even if they were true. "What about business?" she asked. "Business is cleaner," I replied. "It runs on contracts, not ego." A faint smile touched her lips. "You were always better at contracts, and you were always better at rooms." We stood there for a long moment, the hum of computers and muted conversation outside the door filling the space. "I'll make this partnership work," she said finally. "So will I. And the divorce a no one. It proceeds." She nodded once. "Not dramatic, not shattered, just accepting." "You didn't burn anything down," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I just refused to be the one burned." She left without shaking my hand, without asking for forgiveness, without theatrics. And that felt more real than any reconciliation attempt would have. Secootin and 3 months later, Marshall Advisory crossed 40 million in annualized revenue. We'd grown from 8 employees to 23. Our systems were stable, our clients satisfied. Morrow and Finch had regained footing, but under terms that required them to acknowledge what they once overlooked. Camille sent operational updates regularly, professional, precise, sometimes even collaborative. We didn't talk about marriage. We didn't need to because the line in the sand had already been drawn. Not by anger, by structure. And once structure shifts, it rarely shifts back. Tomorrow, the board would formally announce the leadership restructure proposal again. But this time, the choice wouldn't be between legacy and leverage. It would be between ego and evolution. And I already knew which one I'd chosen. The morning the board made their final announcement, I didn't wear a suit. I wore a charcoal sweater and walked into our warehouse-converted headquarters with a cup of black coffee. And the quiet clarity that only comes after chaos has burned itself out. 6 months earlier, my wife had slid divorce papers across a boardroom table and told me she didn't need me anymore. That morning, I didn't need her title. I had something stronger: leverage, stability, identity. By 8:30 a.m., the Morrow and Finch board meeting was already underway downtown. I wasn't present. I wasn't required to be. Dana was there as legal oversight, and Camille was seated at the head of the table again. Same polished posture, same measured tone. But the context was different now. This time the agenda wasn't succession. It was sustainability. At 9:14 a.m., Dana texted me, "It's official." I stepped into my office and closed the door before calling her. "Walk me through it," I said. The board reaffirmed the 3-year strategic partnership with Marshall Advisory. They publicly acknowledged the contract structure you implemented 5 years ago as foundational to company resilience. I absorbed that quietly. "Foundational, Camille?" I asked. She supported the motion. That surprised me more than anything else. "No objection," I pressed. "No," Dana said. She framed it as strategic foresight. Said the company is stronger because leadership can adapt. I let out a slow breath. Adapt? That word mattered. In the CEO proposal, I asked. They revisited it, offered it again formally, and I told them, "You declined." Silence settled in the small room around me. They asked if you'd reconsider in the future. And what did you say? That your focus is on growth. That was accurate. When I hung up, I didn't feel victorious. I felt anchored. A knock came at the door. Jordan stepped in without waiting. "You see the announcement?" he asked. Grin barely contained. I did. They said your name in the meeting. That's new. They didn't say it quietly either. He leaned against the doorframe. "You could have taken it back," he said. "I know." "You didn't." "I didn't." He nodded once thoughtful. "Good. Why?" "Because this," he gestured around the office. The exposed beams, the buzzing team, the whiteboard covered in quarterly projections. "This feels earned." He was right. Nothing about this was inherited. Nothing was gifted. Everything was built. By noon, my inbox was flooded. Congratulations from clients, requests from new prospects, messages from former employees who'd stayed behind, but now saw the shift. And then one message stood apart from Camille. Subject: "Thank you." That was it. No elaboration, no attachment, just 2 words. I stared at it longer than I expected to. At 2 p.m., I walked across the pedestrian bridge over the Cumberland River. The sky was clear, wind cutting across the waters, sharp and honest. For the first time since that boardroom moment, I allowed myself to replay it. Her voice: "I don't need you anymore." She had believed power meant separation, isolation, erasure. What she'd learned, and what I had too, was that power is never about removing someone. It's about knowing what you bring when you walk into a room and what remains when you walk out. That afternoon, I met Camille at the same coffee shop where we'd drawn the line in the sand. No lawyers, no board, just 2 people who had once built something personal and discovered they were better at building something professional. "You didn't take it," she said without preamble, "to be. Why? Because I don't want to be CEO of something that only values me when threatened. She nodded slowly. That's fair. And you? I asked. I'm learning, she admitted. We sat in silence for a moment, not hostile, not tender, just aware. I was afraid, she said finally, of me, of needing you. I considered that. I never wanted you to need me, I said. I wanted you to respect me. She held my gaze. I do. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't reconciliation. It was clarity. The divorce proceedings moved forward quietly in the weeks that followed. No media spectacle, no public blame, just paperwork. Like the contracts that had saved me, the legal documents that ended our marriage were clean, structured, final. Marshall Advisory expanded into 2 additional states by the end of the quarter. 35 employees, multi-year contracts, independent infrastructure, and ironically, Morrow and Finch as our largest client. Sometimes I pass the downtown building and think about that boardroom, about the envelopes sliding across polished wood, about how small I might have felt if I hadn't prepared, if I hadn't built quietly, if I hadn't respected myself enough to ensure I was never disposable. She thought she was ending me. She was introducing me to myself. Power isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't require humiliation to feel real. Power is knowing that if someone removes your name from a door, you can build a better one somewhere else. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you weren't needed, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What moment in your life forced you to build your own foundation? Leave a comment below and tell me your story. And if you want more stories about resilience, reinvention, and finding strength in the quiet moments, subscribe and stay with us. We share journeys like this every day because sometimes the greatest victories aren't the loudest ones. They're the mornings that change everything.